Margaret, a successful architect, manages to close a huge deal. She shares the exciting news with her boyfriend Nathan over dinner. Nathan is thrilled for her and also has some good news of his own. The largest capitalist venture in China has agreed to meet with his organization, and Nathan wants Margaret to join him on the trip. He sees it as an opportunity for them to spend time together. However, Margaret declines. She explains that she can't just drop everything to accompany him, especially since it's his work trip and not even a proper vacation. She wants to build a family with someone who will be present. The next morning, Margaret receives flowers from Nathan as an apology for springing the China trip on her. Shortly after, she gets a call from Ted Banks, her cousin's attorney, with some bad news. Unfortunately, Margaret's cousin Susan and her husband Hank have passed away in a car accident, leaving behind their 2 children. Ted informs her that her name is mentioned in the will and asks to meet in person. Overwhelmed, Margaret breaks down and tries calling Nathan, but it goes to voicemail. He's never there when he's needed. The next day, Margaret travels to Mountain View and becomes emotional as she crosses the bridge, recalling fond memories with Susan. While driving, she calls her childhood friend Tamara to share she's in town. Tamara insists on a visit, and Margaret agrees, realizing how important it is to prioritize meaningful relationships while there's still time. At Ted's office, Margaret is shocked to learn that Susan and Hank have entrusted her with custody of their children, Sammy and Joel. Overwhelmed by the responsibility, she worries about balancing it with her demanding career. Ted further reveals that accepting custody includes inheriting their estate, along with access to a retirement savings account and the kids' education fund. As Margaret gazes at a photo of the children, memories of a heartfelt moment with Susan resurface, deepening her emotional conflict. Later, Margaret visits Tamara and confides in her about the situation. She feels torn, wanting to honor Susan's wishes, but unwilling to put her life on hold. If she declines, custody will go to Hank's brother, a Navy officer. Curious about motherhood, Margaret asks Tamara what it's like. Tamara shares the joys and challenges, assuring Margaret it's chaotic, but deeply rewarding. Encouraged, Margaret decides to give it a try for a month. When Margaret arrives at the estate, she is surprised to find Andrew, her childhood friend and ex-boyfriend. She introduces herself to Sammy and Joel, although they have no recollection of her whatsoever. Andrew explains that he's been helping care for the kids alongside their grandmother, Bertha. Surprised to learn Margaret has custody, Andrew curiously asks if she has kids. Margaret has 0 kids, 0 pets. How hard could it be, right? She asks if Andrew has kids since he seems so experienced, but he explains that while he doesn't, he studied child psychology and works as a consultant at the elementary school. Plus, he spent a lot of time with Sammy and Joel, so he knows the ropes. Bertha arrives with groceries and seems less than thrilled to see Margaret. Margaret reveals she had no idea about the custody arrangement and just wants to get to know the kids before Hank's brother returns from the Navy. Margaret also shares her hurt that no one informed her about Susan and Hank's funeral. Bertha, a bit defensive, admits she forgot to call, blaming Margaret's long absence from their lives. Bertha admits the kids are all she has left, and Margaret promises to do her best. Doubtful, Bertha tells her to call when she's had enough, before leaving. Andrew also heads out, leaving his number in case Margaret needs help. Later, she asks the kids about their routine, which seems manageable. The next morning, chaos erupts when Margaret struggles with breakfast. Joel locks himself in his room, wishing for his mom. Unable to calm him, Sammy suggests calling Andrew. As it turns out, Andrew is already on his way. When he arrives, Margaret admits she's overwhelmed. Andrew manages to talk Joel out of his room and gets both kids ready for school, offering to drop them off. Margaret seizes the moment to ask Andrew if he can also pick them up from school, as she needs to head to the city. Andrew agrees, but before leaving, he encourages the kids to say goodbye to Margaret, and they do so reluctantly. At the office, Margaret's assistant wonders if she'll need to find a new job since Margaret won't be as active. Margaret clarifies that she'll work remotely while her assistant oversees things at the office, which puts her assistant at ease. Just then, Margaret gets a video call from Nathan and updates him on the situation. Nathan admires her for taking on the responsibility of the kids since family means a lot. Later, in Mountain View, Margaret picks up the kids from Andrew. He shares that Joel is being bullied at school, and Sammy is overly protective. He also mentions Joel is very strict about his schedule and doesn't like being late, something Margaret now understands. While there, Margaret sees a high school group photo of herself, Andrew, Tamara, Susan, and Hank, which brings back fond memories. She admits those were good times, and Andrew wonders why she's the only one who left. At home later, Margaret tries talking to Sammy about losing her own mom, but Sammy feels Margaret doesn't know anything about her and brushes it off. Afterward, Margaret plays the guitar, drawing Joel in, but he runs off when she notices him. The next morning goes smoothly as Margaret successfully prepares breakfast and lunch, and the kids head off to school. Later, she vents to Tamara about the kids, feeling like no matter what she does, they don't seem to get along with her. Tamara visits to give Margaret some parenting tips, and Margaret takes notes seriously. Later, Margaret realizes she's forgotten a Skype call with a client and asks Tamara if she can watch the kids. However, it's date night for Tamara and her husband, so Margaret texts Andrew, who agrees to help. Tamara teases her about Andrew, pointing out that he's still single. That evening, Margaret meets Andrew and the kids downtown to listen to a live band. Joel proudly announces that Margaret plays the guitar, prompting her to go on stage. Margaret plays with the band, and everyone has a great time, laughing and enjoying the music. Back home, Margaret says goodnight to the kids. Sammy admits that Joel really enjoyed her guitar performance earlier. Just then, Margaret gets a call from Nathan but ignores it, focusing on Sammy, who's finally opening up to her. She learns that Joel likes singing, so she teams up with Sammy to encourage Joel to audition for the school choir. The next morning, Margaret successfully convinces Joel to take a voice lesson with her, which goes really well. Afterward, she asks Sammy what she enjoys doing, and Sammy reveals she loves basketball and needs a physical exam at school the next day. At school, Sammy proves to be a natural on the basketball court. Over the next few days, the kids begin to adapt to Margaret, and she starts getting the hang of things. While trying out a new recipe, Margaret gets a call from Nathan, who suggests hiring a nanny so they can spend time together when he returns. Margaret refuses, explaining that she can't leave since it's Sammy's first game and the kids need her. Later, Andrew drops the kids off, and Sammy surprises everyone with a new pasta recipe. They're all amazed by how delicious it is. Afterward, Joel urges Margaret to sing the song she played the previous night. Margaret finally gives in and begins the song with Andrew joining in. They get lost in the music, their chemistry undeniable. Noticing this, the kids quietly sneak off to their rooms, leaving them unaware of their surroundings. When the song ends, Margaret and Andrew are surprised to find the kids gone. Andrew suggests it's time for him to leave, and Margaret thanks him for his help. He admits it's been fun reconnecting with her. While Margaret has changed, Andrew notes she's still the same in many ways, which he sees as a good thing, making Margaret blush. Despite the years apart, their connection is still strong. The next morning, Margaret and Joel have another successful voice lesson, and the kids tease her about Andrew. The teasing turns into a playful fight, and they all share a joyful moment. At school, Sammy's first game is a huge success, with her scoring the winning shot, much to everyone's excitement. In the heat of the moment, Margaret jumps into Andrew's arms, creating an undeniable spark between them. However, she quickly pulls away, realizing what she's done. Andrew invites her out to dinner, hoping to spend time together without the kids, but before she can respond, Sammy rushes over, still excited about her win. She asks Margaret to make her pasta when they get home, and Margaret agrees. She also doesn't exactly say no to Andrew's dinner plans. Seems there might be a future for them after all. On the drive home, the kids tease Margaret about Andrew once again. When they arrive, Margaret is shocked to see Nathan waiting outside with flowers. He tells her that her assistant gave him the address, and he wanted to surprise her. As Nathan gives Margaret a kiss, Andrew arrives, witnessing the exchange. Things get awkward when Margaret walks to meet him. He hands Margaret her forgotten bag and quickly leaves, visibly disappointed. Later, Nathan tries to win over the kids by making dinner, but they don't like what he's made and insist they prefer Margaret's pasta. After dinner, Nathan suggests Margaret show him around town the next day, before heading out. The next morning, Margaret visits Tamara and confides in her about the situation with Andrew and Nathan. She admits she likes a lot about Andrew, but things are complicated. Tamara encourages her to talk to Andrew, since he's now part of the kids' lives, and hers. Taking Tamara's advice, Margaret meets Andrew at school and apologizes for not telling him about her relationship. She suggests they stay friends for the sake of the kids, and Andrew agrees. She admits she doesn't want things to get awkward between them, and Andrew acknowledges it was silly to think things could go back to how they were in the past. Later, Margaret takes Nathan for a walk and tells him about Joel's music experience. But Nathan, busy on a business call, doesn't listen. Just then, Margaret gets a call from Ted, informing her that Hank's brother won't be able to take the kids, as he's needed at the Navy longer than expected. However, Bertha has moved to Mountain View and wants to adopt the kids. The decision is up to Margaret, and Ted reassures her the court will favor her if she chooses permanent custody. Margaret tells him she'll get back to him after considering everything, and ends the call. She shares the news with Nathan, who feels she can't drop everything to stay with the kids. Margaret feels conflicted. At first, she just wanted to do the right thing, but now she's become attached to the kids. She admits it's a difficult decision and decides to ask the kids what they want before making up her mind. Back home, Nathan tries to tell the kids about the situation, but Margaret quickly intervenes and excuses him from going outside for a private talk. Margaret wonders what he's trying to do, and Nathan insists she needs to tell the kids about leaving them with Bertha. He gives her an ultimatum to choose between him or the kids. Unbeknownst to them, Sammy overhears the conversation. Realizing the decision she must make, Margaret chooses the kids over Nathan. However, Sammy tells Joel about the situation, and they both pack their bags, planning to run away since they believe Margaret doesn't want them and they don't want to live with Bertha. When Nathan leaves, Margaret is shocked to find the kids gone. She calls the police to report them missing, and they advise her to wait at home in case they return. Andrew, Bertha, and Tamara arrive after hearing the news. Margaret admits to Andrew that the kids overheard her conversation with Nathan and misunderstood it, leading them to run off. Andrew reassures her that they'll find the kids, then heads out to search. Meanwhile, Bertha criticizes Margaret's parenting skills, causing Margaret to break down in tears. Realizing her harsh words, Bertha tries to comfort Margaret, sharing her own shortcomings with Susan when she was younger. Finally, Bertha admits that Susan was right to choose Margaret because the kids need someone who can keep up with them. Meanwhile, Andrew and the search party call out to Sammy and Joel in the woods, but to no avail. Margaret suddenly recalls that Sammy mentioned a cave they used to visit with their parents, and tries calling Andrew to check it out, but he doesn't answer. Tamara encourages Margaret to go, offering to stay behind with Bertha in case the kids return. Meanwhile, Sammy and Joel are in the cave, huddled together. Joel expresses his discomfort with the lightning, but Sammy tries to reassure him that everything will be fine and they'll be home soon. Andrew, returning from a fruitless search, learns from Tamara that Margaret has gone to the cave. He quickly rushes out to meet her. Margaret eventually finds Sammy and Joel in the cave, tearfully apologizing for hurting them. They share an emotional hug, and Margaret tells them she loves them. Just then, Andrew arrives, relieved to see they're safe, and takes them all home. A couple of weeks later, Joel performs excellently at his audition, bringing joy to Margaret, Sammy, and Andrew. During Thanksgiving, Margaret shares a tradition she had with Susan, where they all express what they're thankful for before eating. She urges Sammy to start. Everyone shares what they're thankful for. Sammy is thankful for the unburnt chicken, Bertha for family, Andrew for old friends, and Margaret for the kids. She then reveals she'd love to adopt them if they'll have her, so they can be a family. Margaret admits she'll never be able to replace their parents, but she wants to be there for them always. Joel admits he's thankful for Margaret, and Sammy agrees. They all excitedly dig into the food, filled with happiness and joy in the moment. Later, while doing the dishes, Margaret shares with Andrew that she'll be staying in Mountain View, working remotely and only going into the office once a week, with her assistant handling things in the office. She reflects on their past breakup, realizing it happened because she never returned to Mountain View, and Andrew stopped calling. Andrew confesses that he regrets how things went and wishes he could get a second chance to make things right. The intense moment between them leads to a passionate kiss, rekindling their love for one another. Just then, they are interrupted by a lovely song from Sammy, Joel, and Bertha. Margaret and Andrew join in, their voices blending perfectly with the rest of the family. Despite the loss that brought them together, the family feels whole once again.